In behind me, another area of low pressure, further bands of rain pushing northwards during Thursday night, lingering into Friday morning. Gusty winds too, especially over southern parts of England and Wales. Could get very lively for a time during Friday. So blustery conditions, heavy rain too, spreading across the south. Staying fairly cloudy for Northern Ireland with outbreaks of rain, but perhaps mostly dry and bright in Scotland, particularly in the west. Some good spells of sunshine here on Friday, whereas in the east, quite a lot of low cloud moving in, keeping temperatures suppressed and overall quite a bit cooler for most of us compared to tomorrow.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. State of the Nation, tonight. Green is the symbol of naivety, jealousy, and scuppering breaks opportunities. We've gone greener than the EU and are wasting our newfound freedoms, all in the name of net zero. We'll be diving into that shortly. The 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement is approaching soon, and unfortunately MI5 has just raised the terror threat in Northern Ireland to severe. None other than the leader of the DUP, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, joins us shortly. And His Majesty's government is moving thousands of illegal migrants out of hotels and into former military bases. Could anything go wrong? State of the Nation starts now. We've also got a particularly brilliant panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and Brighton's Labour MP, Lloyd Russell Moyle. As ever, I want to hear from you. Please get in touch by emailing mailmog@gbnews.uk. But before all of that, it's time for your evening dose of the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story this hour is a little bit of breaking news we received within the last 15 minutes or so. The Vatican has said Pope Francis has a respiratory infection and will need to spend a few days in hospital for treatment. It's understood the 86-year-old had complained of breathing difficulties in recent days. The statement says he was taken to hospital for tests but doesn't have COVID. This morning, he attended his weekly general audience at the Vatican and appeared in good health. Let's bring you on to the main news of the day now. And the Immigration Minister has announced plans to stop housing asylum seekers in hotels and instead place them in disused military bases. Admitting that the use of hotels had harmed some towns, Robert Jenrick said migrants will now be placed at sites in Essex, Lincolnshire and East Sussex. The accommodation will be guarded by 24-hour security and meet migrants' essential living needs, he said.
These hotels take valuable assets from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people.
Scotland's new First Minister has vowed there could not be more unity in the SNP as he unveiled today his first cabinet. Humza Yousaf says Scotland's government should look like the people it represents and that he's proud to have a record number of women agreeing to serve. The 37-year-old says the appointments reflect his commitment to a radical and progressive agenda for his country. Now, it's emerged the Prime Minister's wife has links to a company that's set to benefit from a new childcare policy announced in the Chancellor's budget. Childminders will now be paid £600 to join the profession, but that sum doubles if they sign up through an agency. Ashgata Murthy is a shareholder in one of 6 agencies listed on the government website. Well, Labour says Rishi Sunak must urgently set out what steps he took to avoid an actual or a perceived conflict of interest. And the German president has hailed a new chapter in relations between his country and the UK as he welcomed the King and Queen consort to a state banquet tonight in Berlin. And a warning, if you're watching on television, there are some flashing images coming up. King Charles and Camilla have been greeting guests at the Bellevue Palace. President Steinmeier and his wife thanking Charles for choosing Germany as his first foreign visit as head of the royal family, describing it as a tremendous personal gesture. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. Now let's get back to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
The government seems to be wanting to make people's life difficult, whereas I think we should be trying to make it easy. So we've had announcements today that rationing water will be coming in so that anyone who uses over 55,000 gallons will be charged at £4 for every 220 gallons above that, a 166% increase. But we know in this country there is no shortage of water. There may be leaks, there may be incompetent water companies, but we have plenty of water. But in the name of the green economy, consumers, voters, electors must be punished because it doesn't fit with what their masters want them to do. Surely this is not what politics is about. We're seeing the same with cars. Petrol cars in this country are supposed to be phased out, stop being sold from 2030. But even the EU, that famous bastion of freedom and independence and deregulation, isn't going to ban it until 2035, and then has just announced that there will be a scheme so that if you have efficient fuel, you'll be able to carry on making and selling petrol cars. For once, we should be grateful to the interests of the German car industry. But electric cars are still very expensive, and there's no evidence that they will be cheap by 2030. So why are politicians putting penalties on the people that we expect to vote for them? Why are we making people poorer? And it's not just water and cars. We've also had an announcement today that landlords will be penalised if their houses don't meet certain standards. So instead of tenants deciding whether they're going to rent a place and taking into account what standard it is at, this will be set by the government, and governments will fine landlords heavily if they don't meet certain standards. Whereas actually, if you're a tenant, you may find that you're happy to pay a lower rent and have higher energy bills. Surely that should be a choice that you make, a market choice. Otherwise, landlords will leave the market, putting up the rate of rents for people who are already squeezed because we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And then the silliest idea of all is the green border tax. This will be a tax on imports, making the goods that we buy that aren't made in this country more expensive. Again, why are we doing this in the midst of a cost of living crisis? Higher water prices, higher car prices, higher rental prices, and higher import prices. And we import so much of the basics that we use that this will be a fundamental problem for all the voters, all the electorate, all the British people who will find that their standard of living is reduced. Now, the Climate Change Committee is very keen on this. It has said that the heat is on the government to show grit and determination to address the negative impacts that the climate change will continue to have on our daily lives. I don't think that's right. I think it's for individuals to decide how to lead their own lives. And this comes to the fundamental point. What is politics for? Why do people go into politics? Well, it seems to me that the main reason for being a politician is to take the obstacles out of the way of people so they can lead the lives they choose to lead. So to deal with the green issues, we need new technology and things that bring down costs for people, not penal charges on water, on imports, on cars, on renting. We want to be taking the obstacles out of people's way. That is the fundamental challenge, and currently our scramble to net zero before the technology is ready, wishing the end but before working out the means, is simply going to make people's lives more difficult. And that's not why I went into politics. It's not why I asked people to vote for me. I don't want my constituents to be poorer and colder. But of course, I want to know what you at home think. Please get in touch, as always. Email me at mailmog@GBNews. And I'm now joined by a particularly feisty panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and Brighton's Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, do you think we should make people's lives more expensive to get to net zero?
Well, I agree with you that the point of politicians is to make people's lives easier, to focus on the individual and the pathway that individual has. I suspect that's where I disagree with you. That's where my agreement with you ends. If we look at the carbon border adjustments, for example, that you have mentioned, we have, in this country, collectively decided to implement a number of environmental measures that make producing goods here more difficult. But we do that because we say that it is better for the environment and it is better for our planet. What we cannot then allow to happen is all of those jobs to be exported around the world where they follow none of the regulations on the environment, none of the carbon regulations. Basically, those laws then do not reduce our pollution. All they do is reduce our jobs. And so putting a carbon adjustment in means that we say, if you want to import into Britain, you have to be able to meet the standards British companies have to meet.
But hasn't this been the argument of protectionists throughout the centuries, that you have to protect the jobs in whichever market you're in, because you've made your own economy inefficient, you then make it even more inefficient by putting extra charges on consumers. And it's consumers who will pay these charges ultimately.
I mean, the carbon border adjustment is very interesting, that it looks like it's WTO compliant, which fulfills your aim there, because it is about saying you have to fulfil the same penalties, the same charges, the same restrictions that a British company puts on. Protectionism is when you put different restrictions on foreign companies for them selling in the market and make it easier for British companies or your home company. So, and I mean, I think it's the same with the cars, for example. The British car industry has actually bemoaned that we are delaying this because they wish to move forward, move faster, and be a world leader on this. So whilst the German car manufacturing company is popping open the bottles tonight. The British manufacturing world is actually in the doldrums and very disappointed.
Kelvin?
Well, I first of all, I can absolutely guarantee, so if I'm still on God's earth in 2030, I 100% guarantee that we will not have just simply electric cars for sale in our country, new electric cars. It's never going to happen. I don't know. It was like a sighting shot, which as we approach it becomes more and more ridiculous and too expensive. Heat pumps, for instance, you're going to say to ordinary people for the heat pumps. Now, I do know that some builders, in fact, a friend of mine runs a property business, and they put them in right now. The idea that you're going to say to the other 28 million of us out there that you are going to have to spend £15,000 to £20,000 for this heat pump, and we're going to give you 5,000 quid, and you've got to find another 15,000. And I'm sure under Labour we'll probably all be given 15,000 from our taxes, I'm sure. But any other government, I'm not sure what the answer is. There's a whole load of costs coming down the pike, of which we don't know as we look out on a late March day and pouring with rain. I have no idea, perhaps you do, right, because I know you're a clever guy, right, what the climate change is going to look like in our country. So all I can see is cost, and I do recognise that there is going to be some gain somewhere, but the idea that ordinary people are going to have to pick up the bill is just not a good.
And that seems to be the point, that this falls on consumers who ultimately are voters, and they're not going to vote to be poor and cold. We're not going to have public consent for this.
Well, let's take the cars, for example. No one is banning the sale and resale of cars, just like when we phased out unleaded leaded petrol. It takes a period of time. But you have to start, first of all, with fleet cars from companies who buy large amounts of fleet cars. You can now buy an electric car, the Panda Fiat 500 all electric costs less than £10,000. This is for a new car, pretty affordable, and that's the kind of level.
What range does it have?
Well, it has a reasonably good range.
Gets down the end of the drive.
I can't tell you off the top of my head because I'm not a salesperson.
No, I understand that. It's an unfair question.
But I'm giving you an indication.
But a cheap petrol car can take you from Land's End to John O'Groats, and you can refill whenever you need to.
Yes, and with fast charging, you can refill in the time it takes to have a cup of coffee. I agree with you. There are some disadvantages, but there are also some advantages. And some of the advantages are, for example, you can fuel up when you are at home. So when you pick up your car in the morning and you drive it off, it automatically starts with a full tank. So, you know, let's rather than just bemoaning change, I think we can say it needs to be phased in. It needs to ensure that the poorest are not hurt. But the change over to ensure fleet cars are electric, first of all, needs to happen, because what we need is a second-hand market of electric cars, of which currently is almost non-existent.
That's true. But I'm not against change. It's change when the technology is ready, and
Well,
it's
the
change
Teslas are very,
that
very
serves
good.
a purpose. This extra charge for water usage, it seems to me to be fundamentally unreasonable, that water is a commodity that water companies can provide and can provide properly. You're just making lifestyle choices for people by fiat.
Do you know what? Prior to coming on this show, I had no idea that this was the case. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do when I get home is check my water usage.
Well, it hasn't come in yet.
When's it due in?
It was in today's papers. It's a proposal
who proposed
from the government for water companies.
Following pressure from the water companies?
No, the water companies don't want to do this particularly.
No. So why does the government want to do it?
Because it's meant to be environmentally friendly.
No, following pressure from the fact that people along the coast, including in my constituency, are fed up with sewage being pumped into the seas. So the government has said to the sewage companies, we want you to bring the 50 billion that it's going to cost to clean this up forward, and we want to do it in a way that's not going to cost the low users of water, but people who use high amounts of water will have to pay, and people, for example, who have water butts to save water, to stop it flowing straight into the drains, will get discounts, whereas people who have roofs where the water flows straight into the drains, causing the overflow problems into the sea, will have higher
But actually,
bills.
the water butts,
That's the proposal.
The water butts may not cost anything like the 50 billion. That seems to have got rid of most of the overflows where it's been tested.
Yes,
and that costs next to nothing.
Well,
so innovation has got a much cheaper
so
solution.
for 100 quid, you can solve most of the issue. I read somewhere that around 65-75% of the water problem disappears.
And if we do, and if we do it and not need to invest the 50 billion, then the water bills will come down, because there will be market forces that will bring everyone's water bills down. So it will be a win-win. But what you are doing, what the government is doing, and I feel strange, I'm in a situation of defending the government here, but what they are doing is they're saying we are putting in precautionary measures to be able to do the work if it is the maximum amount, and then it might come down. That is very unusual for government. Usually governments lie to everyone and say, with HS2, oh, it's only going to cost half the amount, don't worry, let us approve it. And then they come back to the taxpayer and say, oh, whoopsie daisy, sorry, we forgot it's double the amount. So this way around, I think, is much fairer to the people. At least we know that's the maximum ceiling.
So one of the most serious issues that was raised by your opening piece was the issue involving tenants. Rents in London and the South East, and I presume it's everywhere else, I just happen to know that area, are off the dial. And of course, there's all kinds of things like you'll have to bring in DE or whatever your energy rating is. Actually, the bottom line on it was, thanks to Osborne reducing the mortgage tax relief, which you would get tax relief in any other business, right, that you had. The effect is that the landlords have said, thank you very much indeed, we're getting the hell out of this. And so it was a Tory chancellor
we must
10 years down the
road. We must move on.
But I agree
now
than they were
I agree
with Osborne.
The war on landlords has been the most eccentric thing a Conservative government's ever done. My panellists are excellent as always. They'll be back again shortly. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up next, the one and only Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, leader of the DUP. With the anniversary of the Belfast Agreement coming up, MI5 have raised Northern Ireland's terror threat to severe. We'll be discussing that shortly.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Paul says, could the government explain how closing city centre retail and moving it to out-of-town retail parks inaccessible to public transport users is going to save on CO2 emissions? And John doesn't agree with me. He says you focus only on the costs of a green transition, no recognition of the economic benefits at all. Meanwhile, China and the US innovate with EV, solar and wind. And then he makes the mistake of the green zealots. He immediately says the climate change denial. There's no climate change denial, it's just what the solutions are. And I wish people would have the argument in a proper way. Anyway, in under 2 weeks' time, it will be a quarter of a century, silver jubilee, since the Troubles came to an end with the signing of the Belfast Agreement. But just yesterday, the news broke that MI5 has raised the terror-level security threat to severe. This comes just weeks after a senior police officer was shot in County Tyrone with the dissident group the New Ireland increasingly finds itself in a difficult position, with the boycott on Stormont remaining intact after the DUP rejected the Windsor Framework. Well, who better could I discuss this with than the leader of the DUP, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Sir Geoffrey, thank you so much for coming in. You're not going back into power sharing at the moment. When do you think you will be able to? What do you need to persuade you to do that?
Well, Jacob, what we have said is that the Windsor Framework, whilst it represents some progress on the protocol, which was part of the EU withdrawal agreement, has caused a lot of harm to Northern Ireland, not just in trading terms, but in terms of harming the cross-community consensus that is essential for power sharing to work. And whilst the Windsor Framework addresses some of the problems and difficulties created by the protocol, it doesn't fully restore Northern Ireland's place within the internal market of the United Kingdom. Now, I accept that in circumstances where we have businesses in Northern Ireland, including in my own constituency, that want to continue trading across the border, the Irish border, and into the single market, that we've got to have an accommodation to enable that to happen. But where I draw the line is where the application of EU ends to all manufacturing in Northern Ireland. And to put this into context, Jacob, we manufacture approximately £77 billion worth of goods in Northern Ireland every year. Of those, 65 billion are sold in the United Kingdom. So think about that. Out of 77 billion, 65 billion sold in the UK. 12 billion sold in the rest of the world, some of that to the European Union. And yet, for all of those goods, EU law applies. And that creates a difficulty then, because we're following EU standards. And you were talking about that earlier on your programme tonight about, for example, the route that the EU is taking in terms of motor vehicles, whereas in the UK we're holding on to the, phasing out the traditional form of motor vehicle. But in Northern Ireland, the policy will apply, ironically in this instance, will be the EU policy.
So people like me will come and buy our petrol cars in Northern Ireland in 2031 and then bring them over to England.
And that's precisely why this harms the integrity of the UK's internal market. Now, some might argue that in this instance there is some benefit for some. But the problem is this, Jacob. It impacts on our ability to trade with our biggest market, which is our own country, the United Kingdom.
And the argument for having no border in Ireland itself, between Northern Ireland and the Republic, was that this maintained peace. How concerned should we be about the change of MI5's level of concern?
In fairness, I don't think that the change to the threat level is directly linked to Brexit and to the dispute over the protocol and now the Windsor Framework. Since 1998, we've had a number of so-called dissident groups on the Republican side who've continued their campaign of violence. And it has to be said, we've had some violence on the loyalist side as well. But recently, we've seen the largest dissident group at the moment, the new IRA, as they are called, stepping up their targeting of police officers and prison officers, and they've now threatened the families of police officers and prison officers. And as you rightly said, we had the shooting of Detective Chief Superintendent John Caldwell, who was out coaching his local youth football team, and his son witnessed the attempted murder. So I think MI5 is right in their assessment, and we need now to ensure that the police service in Northern Ireland and the security service, MI5, have the resources to counter this threat.
And do you think that restoring power sharing is an important way to maintain the peace, or that the new IRA are so extreme that whatever you do politically won't actually make any difference to their behaviour?
Well, sadly, Jacob, when Stormont was up and running, the new IRA were active and were killing people. So there is no direct link between Stormont being down and the new IRA continuing its campaign of violence. It's been doing it for some time, even when Stormont was sitting. But of course, political stability is important in Northern Ireland, and that's why we need to resolve these issues. And I have said to the government that whilst the Windsor Framework doesn't go far enough to protect Northern Ireland's place within the internal market of the United Kingdom, I'll continue to engage with the Prime Minister, with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, to get the legislative solutions that we need to provide that protection.
And you think you can get those in a reasonable space of time to go back into power sharing at some point, perhaps over the summer?
I think we need to get those safeguards put in place. My concern is this, Jacob. EU law applies in Northern Ireland for the manufacturing of goods. Now, I believe that that should be restricted to those goods that are sold into the European Union. But the problem with all of this is the risk of divergence, that as EU law changes, and indeed, of course, as you know, through deregulation in the United Kingdom, UK law changes, increasingly Northern Ireland will have a different set of laws across a whole range of areas of law from Great Britain. And that divergence harms our potential to trade in the UK's internal market. That's why we need this protection, and we need it quickly.
And therefore it's a risk to the Northern Ireland economy, and you become more focused on European economies and less associated with Great Britain, at risk to the United Kingdom as a structure.
Well, fundamentally, Jacob, the union of the United Kingdom is not just a political union, it's actually an economic union. And Article 6 of the Acts of Union that brought Ireland, and now Northern Ireland, into the United Kingdom confers on the citizens of Northern Ireland the right to trade freely within their own country, that there would be no barriers to trade between the different parts of the United Kingdom. The protocol, and now the Windsor Framework, maintains barriers that are unacceptable and are unnecessary, actually, Jacob, either to maintain an open border with the Republic of Ireland or to protect the single market. Therefore, we believe that the Windsor Framework doesn't go far enough to ease the restrictions on trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
So people in Great Britain should be saying to themselves, this is fundamentally important because it's about the future of our country. Are we a single United Kingdom or not? And that's why the viewers tonight should be worried.
Well, I heard the Prime Minister earlier this week, in response to the election of a new Scottish First Minister, say very clearly that he values our precious union. Well, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. In fact, Jacob, there is no United Kingdom without Northern Ireland, because, of course, it's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So this is important to us. I mean, we're unionists, we believe passionately in the union, and we want to see the UK government taking measures, introducing legislation that protects our place in the United Kingdom and enables us to trade with the EU in a way that is acceptable to both sides, but fundamentally not at the expense of creating a border between us and the rest of the United Kingdom.
So, Geoffrey, thank you so much for coming in. And don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Still ahead, His Majesty's government is under fire over new plans to move migrants into former military bases. My next guest has a plan of his own involving the SAS. Find out more after these messages from our sponsors.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your mail mogs. Harry says, can you get Kate Hoey on? She talks sense about Northern Ireland. I think Kate's wonderful, says a very good idea. James, why don't the DUP just continue the boycott, enabling direct rule? And Julie, whilst you and your panel are discussing advantages and disadvantages of electric cars, Julie's made a really good point, heat pumps, etc. No one has mentioned the disadvantages to the children mining the cobalt in the Congo for such technologies. We were going to have today a discussion on government efficiency with Tim Ambler, but because of votes in the Commons, and I thought I might not be here, we've delayed that excitement to Monday. But today, we're discussing the government coming under fire amidst the announcement of new plans to start housing migrants in rudimentary accommodation. Could the days of indefinite 4- and 5-star hotel stays be over? Well, we've now been told that former military bases will be used instead. But perhaps one of my next guests has an even greater idea when a few weeks ago he suggested we send the SAS to Calais. Bear in mind, Calais used to be British, and Mary, Queen Mary, sister of Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry VIII, said that Calais was engraved on her heart when she died, or as she was dying, because it had been English and she lost it, and that the SAS should go to Calais to go after the migrant smugglers. He also pointed out that it had the added benefit of annoying the French, which, of course, I wouldn't be particularly keen on doing, and certainly not in favour of violence, although teasing the French is definitely a Brexit benefit Kelvin, send in the SAS, get back Calais, final act of the 100 Years' War.
Yes, well, there is that. Look, my solution, or my suggestion, is not, I don't know whether anybody is going to take this up, is that it is not going to be solved in a conventional manner. We have tremendous brains, and I'm sure even the Labour and the Lib Dems have some ideas. The Tories have had plenty of ideas over the last, 7 years or so. None of them have worked, right? In fact, what's happened is we've got more than ever, and I imagine this summer will be even more because the smugglers actually say, look what they're doing, you better get over there quickly. So what are we going to do? The only way to do it is to cut the head off the snake, which is actually to capture. I have suggested another thing, but everyone goes mad immediately, I say, is capture the smugglers themselves. The French seem incapable of doing it. The Belgian police seem incapable of doing it, and yet everybody knows who they are, because I heard one guy saying that apparently they all drive around in rather big cars.
We should have got you supporting the Labour amendment on the immigration bill, which says that the National Crime Agency should set up a special unit that goes cross-border to target the smugglers and uses extraterritorial powers to capture them.
But you'd
so
have liked
that was
the
our
support,
amendment. We put down and we tried to vote for it.
Right,
the government
vote
rejected
Labour,
it.
vote Labour.
Rejected
But
it.
you'd have liked the support of the French to do this. You weren't just going to go to Calais and do it willy-nilly, were
Well,
you?
we would have negotiated, but we would have set up the unit and we would have resourced the unit and we would
Okay, but why is it? We've got two politicians here, very clever people. Why is it that we seem incapable of capturing these people? And why is it that any time anybody suggests anything, like me sending the SAS in, and even your idea, which is probably better than nothing, or Labour's idea is better than nothing, better than, I suspect, the Conservative offering, why is it that nothing ever gets done? And all we get talking about now is you're out of a 5-star hotel, correct, but you're going to go over there aggravating, a local community that doesn't want all these people wandering around doing nothing.
Let's be clear, they weren't 5-star hotels. I mean, where migrants were put in my constituency were some of the worst hotels in Brighton.
Well, previously, people stayed in them for their holidays, so it can't be that
a lot of them were shut or boarded up and not owned by Adolf van Hoogstraten. But this is kind of by the by. What is important to note, first of all, is that asylum applications have reduced over the last 15 years in this country, and we are lower than they were in 2008. And what has
That's
happened...
the applications. That is not the number that have arrived.
And the people coming over. And the number of people coming over.
That's not true.
But what has happened is that we have clamped down on people coming on trucks. You remember they were hiding in trucks for a long time. We've clamped down on them there, and a proportion of them have moved into boats. And what we will do is we will clamp down on boats, and a proportion will just move into another form of coming over. And what we need to do is have legal processes where people can apply in Calais, and then we can send them back if their application is rejected.
But everybody wants to come. I mean,
not everyone does want to come.
Even the UN said 100 million people want to come.
No, not to the UK. That's not true.
That's what the UN said.
That's what they said.
Here's what the UN said. 100 million people would like, and it shouldn't surprise us because this is a great country to come to. But isn't the problem with the French?
People would like to claim asylum.
Well, that's
not in the UK.
To the UK, yeah. But isn't the problem with the French not policing their own territory? That they have illegal migrants there. They have illegal migrants there who they do nothing to stop coming over to the UK, and they have that within their power because France is a safe country.
They take the vast majority of those who arrive in France, apply for asylum in France, and are granted it or are denied it.
But most of them shouldn't even got to France because they have come through safe countries to get there. So you have to.
But they will all have some sort of links to France, to Britain. But what we need, and I agree with you, we need to stop people coming even into France. And how you do that is you set up, and this is actually partly the Australian model, not a weak touch model, where Australia said there are processing centres, UN accredited processing centres where you can apply, and if you try and come to Australia, we will remove you from Australia and send you back to one of the processing centres, one of the most miserable processing centres they would send people to. But they recognise other processing centres in other countries, Thailand, etc. And what we have not done is recognised any processing centre anywhere else in the world, and that's why we're unable to stop it. But the Australians were able to stop it.
I think one of our problems that we face is that people from lots of different places in the world, which are really desperately poor people, want to come to a Western country because their own circumstances are shocking and are prepared to do anything to achieve that. My question is are Labour and also the Tories, are they in favour of those people coming to our country?
Well, we're going to have to leave that as a rhetorical question because we've got the link working, so we can be joined by the very distinguished human rights lawyer, Geoffrey Robinson. Geoffrey Robinson, thank you for joining us. You're concerned about the human rights of asylum seekers and feel that we shouldn't be taking this approach of housing them in barracks and so on.
Well, housing them in barges takes us back 200 years to where we put undesirables in hulks on the Thames and deported them to Botany Bay. And I think that Dickensian and cruel transportation has ended. We now want to transport them to Rwanda. But the problem with the government's bill from international law perspective is that it plans to abolish the right, and it's a very important right, of asylum seekers to apply in any country where they end up for asylum because they have a well-founded fear of persecution.
But
or
they don't
torture.
have a right, though, do they? They don't have a right to apply once they've been in a safe country. So their right is in France or a country before that, not here.
Well, they do, according to the UNHCR, which is in charge of refugees, and there are 27 million in the world today. And certainly...
But that's not what we signed up to. We signed up to people claiming asylum in the first safe country.
No, they have a right at any point to claim asylum. And this is what the Australians, for all the criticism of that policy, did actually do. They processed those people, and those who were found to be genuine refugees and not economic migrants. Many of them were taken by New Zealand, where they've done very well, others by America. So even the Australians processed. We are going to abolish processing. We're going to abolish the right to claim asylum, which is a precious right.
Well, they'll be able to claim asylum in Rwanda. So they will be able to claim asylum, just not in the UK. That seems perfectly reasonable protection of our borders.
And that's a breach of our duty under international law, according to the United Nations, and my view of it as well, that they do have a right to claim asylum, which we should not abolish. But we're going to put them in.
But it's not the view. It's not the view of the Attorney General, who has signed off the bill as being in accordance with our legal obligations, because every bill has to be signed off by the Attorney General before it can be introduced.
International lawyer, and she's wrong, as she partly admitted. She's clearly wrong, and so we face the situation. And
but this is a key issue. Then lawyers disagree. Lawyers disagree, and there isn't a court that has established this. So a very distinguished lawyer, the Attorney General, takes one view, and you take another. To say the law says isn't really accurate, is it?
Distinguished, but that, of course, remains to be seen.
Well, you don't think she's distinguished because she doesn't agree with you.
She's only
I don't think Baroness Hale's very distinguished because she didn't agree with me on prorogation.
Of course it will be decided by the courts. The policy will be under fire in the courts, and we will find out. But already Mr. Putin is calling us hypocrite for running international law against him. Our soft power depends on the fact that we are a country that abides by international law. So that's a real question mark, I think, for Parliament. As for the problem of housing, we have a duty to not to put these poor people in 4- or 5-star hotels, but to accommodate them with humanity. And that doesn't...
Well, on that point, I absolutely agree with you. I always think people should be housed with humanity. So we can finish on a point of agreement. But thank you so much for joining me in battling through the technological problems. I'm very grateful to my brilliant panel, who I hope will come again next week. But next in this section, the woke have outwoke themselves in a class act of self-cancellation. Find out what I mean after these messages from our generous sponsors.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. You've been getting in touch with your mail mogs. Michael says, can you tell me, Jacob, why we don't take the manufacturers of the dinghies over instead of the hotels? It's a good question. Elizabeth, no, the head of the snake is not the target. The gangs are like the Hydra's head. It is the incentive of the passengers, the demand, which has to be targeted. Well, that seems good capitalism, supply and demand. But John, I've decided to introduce a new prize, a weekly prize, and this week it's a cream egg, which you win for the best mail mog of the week. John says, give every French citizen the chance to continue to retire at 62 if they catch a people smuggler. That's sheer genius. Send us your address and we'll make sure you get a complimentary cream egg. But now, at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests back in June of 2020, calls for reparations began, rather foolishly, in my view, being thrown around. The Mayor of London announced a commission that would review our statues. Call for roads to be toppled were intensified, and that's RH rather than RO. He also wants to close our RO roads as well. Edward Colston was illegally pulled to the ground with the police standing by, sending shockwaves across the country. But amidst all of this emerged the still, small voice of calm. A story broke in the online blog Guido Fawkes, which suggested that the Guardian, the eminent, illustrious, pious guardian of all newspapers, founded by John Edward Taylor, had links to the slave trade. after an investigation conducted by the owners of what used to be called the Manchester Guardian, the Scott Trust, the website announced the apology for its founders' links to slavery, along with a fund of £10 million for, quote, restorative justice. Good luck to them with that. Well, this great self-defeating monster that is wokeness has finally, Pac-Man-like, eaten itself. Perhaps it should cancel itself. I'm now joined by Paul Staines, the man who broke the original story and the founder of the great political blog site, Guido Fawkes. Paul, thank you so much for coming in. How did you find this out?
Well, actually, it was a reader, or co-conspirators as we call them, who found a undergraduate thesis from a guy called Richard Alan Schellenberg, who unfortunately died before he got to see the results of his work, from 1962, which was about the American Civil War and its links to the British cotton trade and the founding of The Guardian. And so I had a read of this, and I thought, this is unbelievable. And actually, I was aware that John Edward Taylor, the founder of The Guardian, was in the cotton trade. It was always, you were always given the impression that he was a liberal merchant of great, progressive views. Actually, The Guardian, it turns out, when you look back in the archives, was on the side of the Confederacy in the Civil War in America. It was making quite specious arguments about why it was a bad idea to emancipate the slaves in America. Nothing to do with John Edward Taylor's interests, I assume, in the cotton trade. But it turned out that in fact, The Guardian themselves in their own research found this out, 9 of the 11 financial founders of The Guardian had links to the cotton trade, and by that, to the slave trade.
So The Guardian is completely mired in the slave trade. It's not like some of these stories we've had about people with a very remote ancestor who had one investment amongst many in something that then turned out to be linked with the slave trade. 9 out of 11 in the cotton trade, absolutely the centre of the activities of the slave trade, and then backing the Confederacy.
Oh, yeah, and as any good Marxist will tell you, capital finds a way of promoting its own interest, and they were capitalists. So the paper itself made arguments that you could say were propaganda against, and gave great reasons why we should perhaps side with the Confederates, and actually condemned Abraham Lincoln's great speech about emancipation as a bad day for humanity, which is ironic in retrospect.
So what punishment do you think should fall upon them? Because on the one hand, as a Conservative, we think these things are history and that reparations is a fool's errand. On the other hand, it's The Guardian.
Well, I think we should go by what they said other parties should do, and that all the profits should be surrendered. So if the whole of the paper was founded 9/11 by the proceeds of the slave trade, they have £1 billion reserve, a capital reserve, which they got from the sale of Auto Express, which they used to own, and they had it domiciled in the Cayman Islands, if I recall correctly. I mean, very tax efficient. So I think maybe instead of $1 million a year, which is 0.1% of their reserve, maybe they should give a bit more. More along the lines of 10%, maybe 100 million. I mean, what price? I mean, some of these founders owned hundreds of slaves.
The hypocrisy of it is absolutely startling, isn't it? And the fact that the biter has been bit.
Well, internally, they had lots of debate, because when it was going on, this is 3 years ago, this is 2020, and at one point, some of the team that were investigating this quit and said it wasn't being taken seriously. So I was quite surprised when out of the blue yesterday.
They've announced it. Well, a fantastic story. You break so many fantastic stories. Your central reading for Tories, at any rate. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate your time on this. But that's all from us. Up next is Dan Wootton. Mr. Wootton, what have you got in your box of tricks tonight?
Jacob, well, we're following up that great Guido Fawkes story and your discussion with your mucker Lee Anderson returning to the show tonight. The Guardian is not his favourite newspaper, so I have a feeling he's got a lot to say about that. Plus, Jim Davidson is in the house, so is Angela Levin, and we're debating whether the police should keep pouring money into the case of Madeleine McCann.
Well, that's excellent. And The Guardian used to have a very good cricket correspondent, but that's a few years ago now. But that's all coming up after the weather, which you won't want to miss. Looking out of the window, it's probably still raining. Thank you to my guests tonight. Thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow from 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation.
Good evening, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. After a bit of a gloomy one today, tomorrow for most of us should be a good deal brighter. There'll still be some heavy showers around
it will be quite mild once more, and it's still going to be pretty blustery. Plenty of isobars on the chart, suggesting gusty winds, particularly this evening close to these weather fronts that are bringing spells of rain across the country. Another pulse of rain heading its way north across England and Wales, spreading into eastern areas through the night. The rain lingering over the Northern Isles, but parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing some decent clear spells. Won't be too chilly, however, enough of a breeze to stop temperatures falling much beyond 6 or 7 Celsius. And for most of England and Wales, many of us will stay in double figures to start Thursday. We do start with a lot of clouds.